Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andrew. Plenty of food for discussion, I'm sure. Who's kicking us off?
Jack Pezzi, Fenner School, ANU. Question that takes us from technology to policy. I'd like to quote more or less verbatim something I think I heard Anna say, which is, policy should incentivize low carbon technologies, but not specify which technologies should win. I thought that was quite diplomatic phrasing, because of course carbon pricing, whether by tax or trading, is the obvious incentivizing policy. And it's also needed to incentivize low carbon behaviors, as in not taking up energy efficiency just as higher temperatures or more comfort. It's needed to incentivize behaviors and technologies, but it's the policy that dare not speak its name. Because we're in a non-carbon pricing world, that's the political reality. That's both an observation and also a question. I'm just curious to know whether we might be able to learn from the Californian example. I raise that just because I went to a couple of presentations over the last few years by Michael Hanneman in particular, and he was at great pains to stress that California had been through a long phase of all but carbon pricing, in other words, a bit wide range of different institutional technology rules, interventions, standards, et cetera, all in the name of reducing carbon emissions, but none of them actually involving pricing, and yet they're eventually moving, as I understand, towards pricing. I'm just wondering, yes, no? I'm out of date there. But anyway, is there much we can learn from that kind of example of how, given the current political constraints, we can move forward in terms of policies?
Yeah, so the update there is there's a fully operational emissions trading scheme in California. Yeah, it has been fully.
The point is, does that tell us anything about how we might move in, say, 5 or 10 years' time when policy dares to do
Yeah, Steve?
So commenting on two levels, and if anything I say appears to be a comment on current government policy, you just haven't heard correctly, and you need to think more carefully about what I actually say. So people care about outcomes, and economists and particularly academics care about mechanism and tool design and those sorts of things. And I think one of the things we've learnt from the last couple of years of political discussion in Australia is the public find it really hard to get excited about tools. Okay, so I think it's important. I don't mean to be rude when I say that. Goodness. So I think it's important to think about targets and goals and outcomes that we're looking for. So the other thing I would say is that you need to be careful when you go from sort of the ideal world of the textbook to the reality. So what a carbon price is trying to do when it's applied to a particular sector, e.g. the electricity sector, where you've actually got really good data already because you know how much coal they're putting into things, it's trying to replicate a system that you could do a bunch of other ways. Okay, so if you mandated, an emissions standard for all new investment or a zero carbon energy system by a certain year, you would provide pretty similar incentive structures where you've got a good measurement system. But if you imposed, e.g., a carbon price on livestock production in Australia, you'd probably have a pretty big headache because you haven't got the measurement to underpin it. So I agree keeping your system broad brush and technology neutral is useful, but I think your real issue is what's your data and what does your data allow you to specify? Because there might be, in land use, for example, there might be a bunch of stuff that we could specify as best practice or encourage or have cross-compliance. So that the biggest changes in deforestation in Brazil came when they said, we're going to enforce the rules we have. And everybody, that was very countercultural in Brazil. But none of those rules involved measurement of deforestation emissions. So start with the data you've got and then ask the question, how do we do better?
Andrew, Anna, any comments? No. Okay. We have Erwin, and I saw other hands around here. Yeah, okay, I've got you.
It's a question to the panel more broadly, because a few times it was talked about that we can do this without structural change to the economy. And just a perception or comment on the Australian policy debate is that trying to sugarcoat something to an extent? Because one of the issues that we have in Australia is that I don't think we're taking a risk management approach to the economy, whereas we're assuming a world exists in part which is where we continue to remain a big fossil fuel exporter, for example. But that world might not exist and might not be in our control because other countries might determine that we no longer want those products. So I guess it's a comment, it's a question to the panel really, is it should we be actually opening up more of the conversation around the risks to the economy from that kind of world, or should we continue to be saying, well, we can do this without major structural changes to the way we export in particular?
Thanks. In the 8 minutes that I had to summarise 12 months' research, I wasn't able to include all the comments that we did put into the report. And I hear your message about our message. In our report, when we said there's no fundamental structural change to the economy, we were quite clear to say, except in the energy sector and land, where it is a fundamental change. And when we talked about structural change, we talked about sectors at the level of mining and manufacturing. Within mining, we have a chart in the report that shows that there are 3 sectors, or one sector in particular in mining, that is coal, that would reduce. Not eliminate, because some other countries at the moment plan that coal with CCS is a big part of their electricity system. Our research showed it could be, but it need not be. So our research showed that coal mining would fall by over half in Australia. Oil extraction similarly, and coal generation in Australia would be eliminated. We wouldn't need unabated coal generation. So we were quite explicit about that. But I think it was important for our research. We deliberately chose that message in recognition that low carbon doesn't mean no mining, and low carbon doesn't mean no manufacturing. And it is difficult to cut through in Australian media and political debate. And so we felt that sometimes a particular impact on one company gave the public the impression that that impact was across the whole economy. And we wanted to really explain that Australia has a lot of resources, and we would continue to export a lot of them, provided we use clean energy.
Is that on? I'm pretty sure that over the next 40 years there's going to be structural change in the economy. Guaranteed, it's going to happen. Sorry. And I don't think we need to say that climate policy is necessarily going to be a huge driver of structural change, because there's going to be other drivers of structural change. Even in the land sector, for example, I'm almost 100% sure that even if we had strong incentives across the board in order to change land use patterns, that the agricultural sector would still thrive, that yes, there would be changeover in a lot of the grazing areas. There's not going to be holus-bolus changeover in croplands. It's just not going to happen. The areas where we produce most of our agricultural output. So at the margins, and in our case, our margins are very big. And that's the big point out of the land sector.
Yeah, no, brilliant question. And part of it goes to the issue of granularity. So the world is going to consume a lot more energy. Okay, the world population is going to grow, it's going to get lots richer, it's going to consume much more energy. What sort of energy are they going to consume? And so you have to go down a level before you get into risk management, and I would certainly welcome, more of a conversation about, the future could be a number of ways. What sort of future would we like to shape?
And just a footnote on Anna's comment on modelling. This is a conversation we have with the other countries' modelling teams, because a low carbon world is still a world where mining takes place, where minerals processing takes place, and the question is where is it cost effective to do it in a low carbon way, and Australia does not look badly positioned for that. Zeba.
Hi everyone, my name is Zeba. I'm a PhD student here at the Crawford School. This question is for Anna. You talked of technological innovation and how it's happening fast and how it makes business sense for companies to actually adopt such measures and to be more profitable. In that context, how important is policy? Or in other words, in absence of concrete policy, implying that we continue to bicker, how far could technological innovation alone take us to achieve our targets? Thank you.
It's a great question. And if it wasn't for the carbon budget giving us a ticking clock, I think I'd feel confident about the direction of technological development, with a couple of exceptions, and carbon forestry being one of those. But the steepness of that line that you saw in the previous session, multiple slides showing us the carbon budget declines to zero in our working lifetimes. So we need to respond to that, and policy tools are very important and effective because the technologies are sold into a market, and we know there are market imperfections, particularly in energy efficiency, information asymmetry, product, but behavioural psychology of the consumer at the point of decision making, that they don't have perfect knowledge about the energy consumption costs, for example, of the television or car that they're purchasing. So in that particular example, setting standards for for that technology class in a permanently rising trajectory, so that the standard ratchets up each year at about the pace that technology improves each year, with an opt-out clause for industry where there happens to be a break in that trend, means that the consumer need not absorb all of that information at the quick point of purchase sale. So acknowledging the market imperfection and allowing policy to match the technology progress in order that the uptake of that technology allows us to stay within the carbon budget. It's really important, particularly for avoiding the lock-in when we purchase assets that have a long life, such as a car. And if we don't set a standard for the minimum efficiency of that car, the car's on the road for more than a decade and we miss the window. Similarly, building the next building, that building could be alive well beyond the life of the carbon budget. And if we allow the building to be built in a way that is still emitting carbon beyond that budget, we've missed a cost-effective opportunity where it would have taken the market a lot longer to educate the consumer in order to make that decision. There's probably a lot longer explanation required, but that's perhaps the shortest way I can help answer that question.
We've got room for two quick questions. So
Just
you want to
very quickly, Rod Holsgrove from Humane Society International. On the carbon forestry, I couldn't understand, Stephen, why you avoided deforestation in terms of both carbon and biodiversity benefits. And my understanding is that a biodiverse forest is more resilient and more secure than just a pine plantation. And the other thing is more of a statement, but question as well, in terms of overseas red credits for Andrew. You've got the low-cost carbon benefits, also perhaps significant global biodiversity benefits, plus benefits for sustainability in developing countries. So I hope in our models in the future we do have room for overseas red credits, and I'm interested in your response on that.
Are we asking two questions, Frank?
Yeah, please. Yeah. So what, 2 seconds? What? Sorry, I lost you.
Okay, so the quick response on the modelling we did, we find essentially you don't mobilise significant carbon sequestration in Australia until you get a price above $40 a tonne that you're paying to whoever the landowner is. In a world that's on a 2-degree pathway, we thought it was reasonable to assume that the non-price measures, regulations, would prevent net clearing. And so we just looked at the upside of paying for new reforestation.
Don't really have comments on the red stuff. You know, it's government policy not to allow the use of international permits. What's my personal position? I think you can probably guess that.
Graham Hunter from the United Nations Association. Just trying to connect the pre-coffee break presentations with the post-coffee break. In developing models and so on through the Prime Minister's task force, are they drawing on what you're presenting? And are you comfortable about how that process will work?
I think the process is still underway. The task force has been very open and willing to meet with a vast range of stakeholders. We've made our research available. So I think it's it's a moving feast, and they're here today, well represented.
Yeah, perhaps to just add to that, I mean, it does appear to be a quite a compressed timeline that the task force appears to have, and I mean, yeah, a big part of the purpose with today's forum and other activities that we have in terms of policy outreach is to bring to bear the very rich and varied expertise and research that exists in the various universities, think tanks, and make that available to the broader public debate as well as to the task force, obviously. So we have one final question for this panel.
Hopefully quick. Steve, I'm wondering what assumptions you made about forest burning, how frequently and whether climate change affected that, and if so, how quickly. And similarly for Andrew, I was a little bit alarmed about wildfires sort of being excluded from the calculation. How about the rules on preventive burning as well, burning to reduce fuel load and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so very quickly, because this is quite technical, we have a sort of a 10% risk buffer that you have to sort of, you can't sell 10% of the carbon you sequester. We look at the spatial distribution of fire risk under climate change, and we take that into account, but this is a 2-degree scenario, so by 2050 the spatial risk is not huge. We actually model out 100 years because we get the net present value, and then we take it back. And the last question, we also take account of things like rainfall on the agricultural production, how that affects the land value and those sorts of things, and feeds through.
The answer on the exclusion of wildfires for forest management is, thank you, is that the whole idea of the national accounts and the whole idea of the international scheme is only to account for anthropogenic emissions. So as a result, we don't want wildfires in the accounts. So in order to do that, what they do is take a historical mean, and then they exclude emissions from wildfires above a standard deviation, I think, or is it 2 standard deviations from that, in order to make sure that Australia doesn't get hit for events for which it is not responsible. Kind of, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Steve.